Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of React Native Radio. Today on our panel, we have Charles Max Wood.
Hey folks, the book's now out on paperback, so we'll put a link in the show notes.
Chris Reyes.
Hey everybody.
And longtime guest, first-time panelist, Jamin Holmgren.
Hey everybody, nice to be here.
And I'm Josh Justice. I'm glad to be here as well. Today for the discussion topic, Chris had a suggestion. Chris, why don't you introduce us and get us thinking about it?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to treat this as an idea of like a developer shopping spree episode, but in terms of when you're starting a new application, what kind of libraries you kind of reach for styling, navigation, and even just kind of bootstrapping your app. So I thought it would be cool if we each kind of talked about what we do and why we choose it, and any kind of learning references for those who are kind of getting started in the field, and if they wanted to kind of learn more about what we're using and why we use it.
Infinite Red is a US-based consultancy specializing in React and React Native. They do mobile app and web design and development. They are deeply involved in the React and React Native open source communities, publish the React Native newsletter with 10,000 subscribers, and are involved with the React Native core development. If you have a project and need design or engineering help from an experienced team to take it all the way from concept to completion, get in touch with Infinite Red. You can find them at infinite.red. Make sure to mention you heard about them in this ad.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I can kick us off just to kind of get the idea of what I was thinking. So I'm working on a course right now, and I kind of wanted to build like a clone of Bear Notes. I don't know if anybody else uses Bear Notes.
I'm obsessed with it. I love it.
Oh yeah,
I don't. Changed my life. Can you give me a brief rundown of what it is?
It's your best friend. No, so I mean, if you're a note type person, Apple has their note app. I mean, everybody has a notes app, obviously, but Bear is kind of iOS centric. I mean, but they do such a good job of syncing across devices. So it's kind of like Apple's notes app, but like for lack of a better word, on steroids. It's kind of next level. You can kind of categorize your apps with like hashtags and categories, and then it's got a great search. It's got a good cloud sync, and it's got themes. So I love dark theme, so that's one of the things when I was working on Apple Notes. I don't know if it works now with night mode, but before you only had that yellow screen, where with Bear Notes, you can kind of customize your theme, and then you can also do code snippets in it and use Markdown, and it's a great app.
Yeah, I do a lot of blog writing and in Markdown. And so Bear has great Markdown support, and it also has really great quick synchronizing. When I was using a Dropbox-based solution, I would often edit a file and then close my laptop or quit out of the iOS app, and it wouldn't synchronize in time. And so I'd get conflicts. So again, much fewer conflicts between devices with Bear Notes.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, my team has just started using Notion recently, which is like Christopher said, there's a million of them out there, but this is the first time I've not had to push something in order to adopt it, so that's a good sign. But it's still kind of an experiment. We're going to see if it ends up being a big thing. But Christopher, I don't think you were just talking about your notes. You had another thing you were going to do. So
but before I get going, Notion, I use Notion too, and Notion is such a great team thing too. So that's a great use case. And that too, I mean, for people getting out there, go see what Notion is doing. And if you just want to get started learning, try replicating these big apps, because, when you're working at a big company, these are the kind of things you do, and you kind of stand on the shoulders of other people that are doing cool stuff and make it your own, you know what I mean? But for me, the UI of Bear is super user-friendly, and I just thought it would be a nice intro project for someone getting started in React Native. So you kind of come in and you have an accordion, a list of notes, right? And then you select your note, and then you go to a full screen of that note. So right there, I'm kind of thinking there's a UI toolkit I can use, navigation. So what am I going to kind of go for? So the three I chose, because I wanted to kind of gear it towards people getting started. I usually would do Expo, but for this case, I chose React Native CLI, just kind of keep it kind of small and simple, because I wanted people to kind of set up their development environments for Android and Xcode as well, because I feel like that's a super valuable skill to have. So that's why I chose React Native CLI as the bootstrapping aspect of the application. And for navigation, I chose React Navigation because I feel like people coming from the web, it's the most transferable kind of skill. And so if you're bouncing back and forth between React Native and React Navigation, React Native and React Web, it's that kind of smooth transition, and it's not super difficult. There's no learning curve, and it's just really easy to use. And it has the idea of nested navigators. So if you wanted to do a tab navigator or like a side panel, it's pretty easy. You just kind of import your navigator, and you set up your JSON or your JavaScript object, and it gets you going. And then for styling, I chose native base just because I like the boilerplates. It has that expo. I mean, both React Native. I'm blanking out. What's the other one that I really like? The UI toolkit we talked about last week, Josh.
React Native Paper.
There's Elements as well.
I forget which one you mentioned. I know there was a different one.
I really like React Native Elements as well, but I went with Expo because it had the use case of the accordion of what I was looking for, that kind of collapsible list. So I just thought that was user friendly, and people kind of getting started had that Expo app you can kind of grab for.
The data layer is always a big interest to me. Are you just using component state and context, or anything more robust than that?
My idea for this was to use just the context API, and I wanted to be able to use the use context hook. It's pretty simple. I was just gonna have like a list, like a object, and each object had like a note title, and then in the body, like a body key that would have like the body of the notes, because I'm starting simple. And that would just kind of be in context. And then I wanted to use React Native Async Storage to kind of persist, so we didn't have to worry about working with an API. So I think React Native Community does Async Storage, which is another great package if you just kind of want to get that local storage feel in React Native. I don't know if you guys have worked with Async Storage yet, or what you guys think of it.
Yeah, we've used it quite a bit. And it was actually, I think, in the React Native core, and was extracted as part of the lean core effort into the community. So that's been kind of a fun thing to work on. I worked on the web view extraction, moving it into the community. And so there's a lot of high quality components that have come out of React Native core and been able to improve once they hit the community. And async storage is definitely one of them.
Interesting timing on async storage. The release candidate of version 2 has just come out in the last 24 hours. So if you are using async storage, give the version 2 release candidate a try. I haven't gotten to look to see what new features are in there, but it looks like there's a good amount.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Yeah. And seeing that's one of the things too. I hadn't done Bootstrap, got an app started for a while. So even when I was going through the docs, because I had just got a new laptop, I didn't realize that they moved out the actual CLI too. So you had to use npx to kind of get it going. So that's another good tidbit to give out there, is when you are getting started, always go back to the GitHub or your documentation and make sure that you're kind of up and you're kind of doing the most recent thing, because I was just going to do what I always did, and then good thing I went and checked the sites, because there were new steps to be concerned about.
Christopher, did you, with React Navigation, did you use the new version 5 API with the component-based API? I think it's still in beta, so wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but there's a new component-focused API for React Navigation now on version 5.
No, I didn't. I did 4, which I kind of, I didn't really look at the beta stuff just because I wasn't sure when things are going to be released and stuff, but
yeah,
that is a kind of a cool thing to know about. And definitely want to check that out.
Yeah, it is. I think they've done a really good job of kind of identifying a new direction to go with it. It's really almost a new library in some ways. Like the underlying code is there's a lot of similarities and same code, but the API is quite different. Instead of having kind of an imperative style, it has just a declarative, like JSX style component driven API. And so I haven't actually used it yet. I've just kind of, I saw them announce it at React Native EU, and I'm interested to see how it works out for us.
I'm excited about that as well. I've programmed in a lot of different environments. And so the idea of, this is a more imperative API, I was like, I'm okay with that. Like, I'll work with that. But just in the last few days, we've gotten into on our client project, with React navigation, some of the complexities. We ran into a situation where components aren't unmounted and remounted when you navigate off of them. And I know there's a lot of great reasons for that, and I certainly don't know a better way to build a navigation library.
Right.
But just the fact that that wasn't like I expect for the normal React and React Native experience, it just showed me the value of consistently using components, consistently using a declarative approach. And so I'm excited to see where version 5 goes and if it makes that experience a bit more predictable.
Yeah, that's the mount and unmount. I was looking into that, and I think that's a little bit, not a gotcha, but when you use the stack navigator, which is that kind of, for those listening and you're not sure, that's the kind of that card fill where you're putting cards on top of a stack. When you do a stack navigator, there are some kind of gotchas to watch out for when you're mounting and unmounting components. If you are using the class-based component and you like tap into that lifecycle method of component will unmount. But to go back to React navigation too, that even the install process between 58 or if you're on React Native 58 and 60 is a little bit different because you were able to use React Native Link, and now you need to do a little bit more inside your Android file for setting up gesture handler too. So these are some of the things I ran into, but I just really want to shout out to React Navigation's documentation. It's just amazing. It's so good. So thank you guys.
Yeah, they've really done an amazing job with documenting it and just in general supporting it and building it forward. So I guess I can maybe go next and talk about a stack that I would use for a side app or something like that. I did actually start building a side app earlier this year. I'm an NBA fan. Just went to the Portland Trail Blazers game on Sunday actually. And so a couple of days ago. So the big thing is I want to track, like they have a new roster this year. There's a lot of new players. I want to track their different players. So I wanted to build a little app where I could just put different players in and track their stats and different things like that. So also the popularity of the player, like how much do I like this player? Is this player like someone that I really enjoy having on the team or what? So I started and built the app. I built it using Ignite, which of course is, I'm sure a lot of people have heard if they've listened to this show. I know that you've talked about it in previous episodes. So my company, Infinite Red, has built Ignite, and it's, I think, been out since 2016. So it's been out for almost 4 years now. So it's been around for quite a while, and it has kind of a predefined stack that we use at Infinite Red. And basically the way that it works is that only if we use something in an actual client project, because we do, we're consultancy and we do client projects, only if we use it and it's successful, and we can come back and like in the retro say, yeah, this was worth it, do we then include it into the stack? And so this happened with React Navigation because before that, I think we're using React Native Router Flux or something like that. It was like the older version. Had kind of a cool API, but it wasn't super well supported and a little janky in a lot of ways. And React Navigation came out, and just the sheer amount of effort that was being put into it was like really intriguing to us. Like, okay, this is for real. Like they're really trying to make this the navigation solution for React Native, and it's really just continued to evolve and grow. So React Navigation, I was really happy to hear that they introduced version 5 with the component-based API, and every release that comes out, it just gets a little better and a little better every time. So that's what we do use for navigation. That's what I used for this little hobby app too, and it worked really well. I was so one of the things about it, even though I've worked with React Native for a long time, basically since it came out, I'm in my role at Infinite Red. I don't do it every day. I'm CTO, so I run the team. And so when I'm working on my own app, it's a little different story. I'm looking for things from a little different perspective. But it was very easy to use, and I was able to use the Stack Navigator And everything was set up for me. So that's one of the benefits of Ignite is, you don't have to go in and patch Android files or anything like that. That's all done for you during the setup step. So when you generate the project, it'll generate a brand new React Native app using the React Native CLI. And then it copies in the files, runs them through, their template files, like their EJS files, basically template files using JavaScript. And it'll run them through and generate a project that has the right names and setup. And then it will also go in and patch the files that were generated during the React Native init process. So you'll actually get your Android files and iOS files patched before you start. So you're not having to really mess around with some of those things. And it just comes like ready to go. Like you can just start using it. So that's one of the benefits of Ignite is that we take care of that because we need it ourselves. So we're gonna make sure it works. So that's a big thing for state management. We use MobX State Tree. So we used to use Redux, but we got a little tired of Redux, and we found MobX State Tree. Tried it on a project. It worked really well, and so we moved it into the boilerplate and started using that. And with that comes MobX itself, and then MobX React Lite. MobX React Lite is basically it supports a hooks-like syntax for sharing state. And then for sharing the stores, the MobX State Tree stores throughout the app, we use context. So the use context hook, that we use that everywhere with providers and stuff. So that's how we kind of get things, get data wired up all the way through the app and then re-render when we need to. Let's see, what else do we use in there? We also have React Native Screens, which is kind of underlying React navigation. It allows you to do native navigation stack if you want. One of the things that's interesting about React Native is that a lot of times we will like rebuild things that already come standard with the standard UI kit under the hood. So there's a navigation solution built into both Android and iOS. For Android, you have activities and fragments. They're essentially like a stack, but you can build these little like mini apps with stacks of screens on top of them. And on iOS, you have UI navigation controllers, tab controllers, things like that, so that you can build fairly complex navigation views using native components. With React Native, a lot of times we end up rebuilding that stuff because we want to work in the JavaScript layer. We don't want to be working in Objective-C. We don't want to be working in Java. And so we rebuild a lot of those things. And that's what React Navigation did, was that it kind of built its own stack, its own handlers, its own gesture handlers, which was great for keeping everything in the JavaScript side of things. But performance-wise, there's a lot of performance optimizations built into the UI kit and Android activity and fragments. And so these performance optimizations are things like, let's say that you have a stack of 10 screens. It's only going to hang on to the top 2 or 3. The ones underneath are going to be deallocated for memory purposes and performance purposes. And so when you look at your stack, you're not seeing like all these screens kind of hanging out in memory, maybe holding onto a bunch of references to a bunch of stuff. It's going to actually deallocate those things and get rid of them. And then once you pop like screens off of the stack and start getting back to the previous screens, it'll actually reload them behind the scenes so that it looks like they've been there all along. So this is kind of cool. By the way, one of the reasons I know so much about this is I built a navigation library for native apps way back in the day.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that was something I had to learn a lot about. But yeah, React Native Screens then gives you some of that capability back. So it actually brings some of the native capability back to React Navigation and then allows you to hook into that.
Oh yeah. So yeah, when I made my first React Native app, I did like a blocky job and it was slow, and I was like, oh man, like, did I break React Native? Is it me? And I'm glad you brought up the performance optimizations, because I was doing things wrong, rendering lists and whatnot. But it led me down the path of kind of researching navigation, and React Navigation does mention on their site, because it is a JavaScript, it's working on that JavaScript thread and having to go across the bridge, and there's performance opportunities if you use native navigation. When you ran into that issue, were you guys in the middle of like an app with React Navigation and you were seeing the issues of slowing down, or is it because your history, you kind of saw it coming and you were able to jump on the native navigation path first?
It was always, this was always something we were a little concerned about because we did come from native development. We did both web and native development. And so we were always a little concerned about it. It's like, wait a minute here. We're pushing all these things onto the stack and they're not being deallocated. Like, this is something we're used to happening on the iOS and Android side. And so I would say it's more that we saw it coming. We didn't really experience it in apps, which was kind of the argument of the React Navigation team, is that like, you only have a performance problem when you have a performance problem. You know, tell me if you actually like run into one, and then we'll look at it. It was basically kind of the response, and that's fair. That's totally fair. But when React Native Screens came about, you know, when it came through, then it was like, okay, well, this provides the underlying hooks into the native navigation layer, and then the JavaScript side can remain pretty simple. Now, there are some downsides to using native navigation stack. You have less control over it. Basically, is the big thing. Like, you kind of have to live in their world. You have to deal with their API. You can't totally customize it like you could on the JavaScript side. But yeah, that was definitely something that when it came along, it answered a lot of questions, because we experimented with React Native navigation by Wix. And that one takes a different approach, where they're going to try to hook into the native libraries and use those as much as possible. A little harder to set up, a lot less flexible, but very performant. That's essentially kind of where we landed on it. We did try it on we did try it on one app rather, and the app went fine. But in the end, it didn't seem like it was supported as well as React Navigation. I don't think there's quite as much activity on it. There's not as much development happening with it. There's not as much documentation, not as many blog posts. So from our standpoint, to mitigate risk, it made more sense to go with React Navigation. And then when React Native Screens came around, then it was kind of a no-brainer, because now we get the benefit of having the native navigation stack, and also have all the flexibility and awesomeness and support and everything that React Navigation brings.
When I'm building a new product, G2I is the company that I call on to help me find a developer who can build the first version. G2I is a hiring platform run by engineers that matches you with React, React Native, GraphQL, and mobile engineers who you can trust. Whether you are a new company building your first product or an established company that wants additional engineering help, G2I has the talent you need to accomplish your goals. Go to devchat.tv/G2I to learn more about what G2I has to offer. In my experience, G2I has linked up with experienced developers that can fit my budget, and the G2I staff are friendly and easy to work with. They know how product development works and can help you find the perfect engineer for your stack. Go to devchat.tv/G2I to learn more about G2I.
I got a couple of MobX state tree questions. I know Infinite Red has talked about this a number of times, but Redux is very, very common. What is it that y'all prefer about MobX state tree?
Yeah, so I gave actually 3 talks about this year. I gave one at React Native EU. So if you're listening to this, go ahead and check that out. I gave one at React Live Amsterdam, where I actually live coded on stage an Ignite app, and I showed how to use this stuff. So I think there were a few big things that kind of came out of Redux. One was the amount of boilerplate. I think this is a common complaint, where people are like, we're having to touch a lot of files, a lot of different lines of code just to add one property or something like that. Another was performance. You can make performant Redux apps for sure, but it's not like the happy path all the time. Like, you have to really think about how you model your data, and how you're consuming it, and how things are going to re-render. Where with MobX state tree, especially with MobX React or MobX React Lite, MobX React includes basically all the features of MobX React Lite, but it also supports class syntax, where MobX React Lite only supports function components with hooks. So just keep that in mind. So MobX React or MobX React Lite gives you ridiculously good performance right out of the box without having to think about it at all. You just use it, and it's going to be performant pretty much in 95% of the cases. When it's not, it's super easy to fix. So those were a big deal. Now, a lot of times you're going to be hearing like MobX or MobX React or MobX State Tree. What are the differences? MobX is just the engine underneath it. It provides a set of functions and capabilities to basically observe values and then call a function when something changes. And then, so it's a really simple thing, but it's very unopinionated. To use it, you'd have to have a pretty good understanding of how you want to do this, or you just use MobX State Tree, which gives you sort of that Redux-like framework around it. And MobX State Tree gives you things like you can define your properties and you can define what types they are, and they're runtime types, not like TypeScript, but they're runtime types. They'll actually check the values that are being put into your models. So like in Christopher's app, if you were to try to put a number in for his note, which is supposed to be a string, it will tell you, hey, you're putting in the wrong value here, which is really helpful, especially when you're consuming really cool APIs. What was that, Christopher?
That's really cool. That's a nice property. That's a nice benefit to have to that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, totally. We think so. And you can also infer your TypeScript types from those runtime types. So you're not having to type things twice. You just say types.string or types.number. And then it also gives you actions. So the actions can be either like lifecycle actions, thinking in terms of like after create, for example, is one that gets fired. And you can just do stuff like after you create an instance of this model, now do something. And Josh, you've done Rails, so this is kind of active record-ish, where you can create these hooks and have them run after you create a model or something like that. And then you can also do custom actions, and those are used all the time because the only place you can modify or mutate a model is from an action. So you can't mutate it outside of that. So think of an action as being a Redux action and reducer together, but you're just using dot syntax to set things. So you're like, I want my user dot name to equal new name, right? So you just pass in the new name and it'll mutate it using the dot syntax. But inside the action, because you're only mutating it in the action, it now knows to fire off, hey, let's go update anywhere that dot name is being used. And that's the MobX React part of it, because it can observe where it's being used in a React component and allow you to re-render only those components that consume those properties. And then there's also views, which are basically computed views or computed properties, if you've done like Ember, where you take the data that's already inside the model and you mutate it in some way. So for example, let's say you have a first name and a last name, and you want a view that is full name, right? You just take first name, space, last name, or whatever, however you're going to mutate it, and return that. What's really cool about that is it also watches that. So if you use dot full name somewhere, if first name or last name change, it will re-render that component. Because it knows what properties are composed to create that computed view. If you're a beginner, maybe some of the stuff might come across a little bit like a little too complex for you, and I understand that. But honestly, it's not that difficult. You can go check out my talks. I think we'll probably link to it in the show notes here. And I try to explain it in a little more simple detail. And there's also there's code. There's lots of code on the screen, so you can look at it and see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and part of the value of a boilerplate and a CLI like this is that you don't have to understand all those details. You can go with a recommendation, like y'all have for MobX State Tree. One question about boilerplates. So I know that y'all have a few different boilerplates or setups for projects, and Ignite Browser is the latest one that I see in there that has React Navigation, a MobX State Tree, and TypeScript. Is that boilerplate pretty much set and static at this point, or is it evolving, or do you see a third one that starts with the letter C coming anytime soon?
Yeah, we do intend to create another one called Cyber Demon, actually. So these are named after video game villains. Cyber Demon from Doom. We had Bowser from Mario. This is totally one of those things that is an internal debate all the time at Infinite Red. Like, when do we create a new boilerplate? The thing is, Bowser's working really well for us, so it doesn't really make sense to make too many drastic changes. It has evolved a lot, though, especially this year. Like, we've committed more to Ignite this year than we have in any previous year. We're actually continuously updating it. And I think some of the big things, we went to hooks across the board. So like for local state, you're using hooks. For app state, you're still using MobX State Tree, but we're using MobX React Lite, which only supports hooks. So we're like all in on the hook side of things with it. You can always go with class components if you just move from MobX React Lite to MobX React. And we've made some other changes, like file structure was a little too complicated. When we first built it, we were trying to go with more of a domain-driven design, and we've gradually backed off from that and made it more and more flat and easier to use for beginners. I think that actually the folder structure is pretty strong right now. Like there's not too much there that I'm kind of like that's jarring to me anymore. I feel pretty good about where it's at. And we're just kind of like gradually, updating, fixing, simplifying, making sure it works the right way. One of the big things for Cyberdaemon that we want to do is a little more of a component library. So there's one built into Ignite, but it's not super useful. It's just kind of things like, hey, here's a cool button that allows you to do internationalization and stuff built in, which is cool. But it wasn't like using React Native elements or something like that. So we're actually looking at building a little more of that into it, but the general idea behind that is going to be quite different than React Native elements. So that would be a Cyberdaemon thing. That would not be a Bowser thing. But most likely, if we went to Cyberdaemon, we would keep a lot of the elements that worked well in Bowser, like MobX State Tree and TypeScript.
Cool. Anything else about your stack you want to talk about while we're on the topic?
I think the only thing lacking was really talking about the UI library. So I basically would build things from scratch. So I would use the built-in styling and build the components myself. I don't think it's necessarily the best way to go, but that's what I would do at this point. Hopefully at some point, if Ignite UI, which is what we're calling the new UI library, comes through, then maybe I would use that. But yeah, that's the front end, what I would use.
I have a question about UI libraries for both of you, actually. I am one of the worst visual designers ever. And so I definitely reach for those off-the-shelf solutions because it's just so challenging to me. And it's not the part of side projects, especially, to get exciting for me. Now, for client work, we'll go with what the designs of the app demand. And when I have designs working off of, like, I'll create things from scratch, and that's great. But I'm curious for both of you, like, Jamin, what is it that even for like a hobby project makes you reach for building it from scratch? And Chris, what made you reach for native base? And if you just use it off the shelf, or if you find yourself wanting to tweak its look and feel at all?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just familiarity. I don't have a lot of familiarity with the other UI libraries out there. And so I just build it. Also, this project that I was doing earlier this year was a little bit of a learning project too. And I didn't want to short circuit some of the front end stuff, because that's actually what I'm not very good at. I'm like you, Josh. I'm more of a back end dev, to be honest, having to learn more front end because that's the way the world is going. But I'm much more comfortable in the data layer than I am on the UI. Yeah.
And for me, it's a little bit of an awkward world because a lot of the stuff I get to do is contract work, so the reason I kind of grab for UI toolkit is because, it kind of stops that idea of reinventing the wheel. And they are both, native base and React Native Elements and Paper are, great libraries that have been kind of battle tested. And that's why I'll choose those. And specifically native base for this instance, I really liked it because they have, I think React Native Elements has it as well, but the familiarity with the theme generation with native base is like super simple. And in Bear, they have this idea where you can actually choose your theme. So if you want like a light or a dark theme, they have like 8 or 9 you can choose from based on what package you have. And I thought it would be cool in this instance, like if I ever get to it, this is obviously like a iterative process, but you can create multiple theme files, and then based on your logic, point to that theme file and your whole app will change pretty simply, just driven off of one file. I like the feel and the opportunity to be able to do that.
That's cool. Using Bear and taking advantage of the themes, that obviously seems like a perfect fit for that theming functionality. Sometimes when it's an app by a company, maybe an e-commerce app, I'm like, do I really need themes? But yeah, for a utility app where you're working in it day to day, the benefits that some of these libraries provide for theming are really nice. One other case that I can think of when it comes to picking a UI approach, I mentioned doing things from scratch on client work. reaching for these UI toolkits for hobby apps. When I'm doing teaching, like tutorials, workshops, I will generally use the built-in UI components as well, partially because the look and feel is usually not the big emphasis at that point. Also, I do a lot of teaching on testing, and being able to look things up, look up form elements, buttons, text fields to interact with can be different when you're using a UI library. It can be a bit more indirect, and so to teach that in the most straightforward way, I like to use just the built-in text inputs and buttons and things like that, and then let people add the UI layer on top when they're ready for it.
Yeah, I should mention that Josh taught our testing workshop at Chain React this year, which is our conference in Portland in July. Did a great job, had amazing reviews. So good job on that, Josh. We really loved having you there, and we're hoping to have you back next year for another testing workshop. So everybody keep an eye out. Josh is an awesome teacher. If you're interested in learning more about React Native testing, keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And I hope to be back as well, for sure.
So I have another approach.
Go ahead, please.
So I was looking, I'm trying to remember when it was, and maybe Jamin remembers this, but I was looking at putting together an app for devchat.tv. And so I reached out to Infinite Red, and I had a conversation with Jamin and I think one or two other people over there. And they basically told me that the app budget was, not what they were looking for, which makes sense. They know their business, but they recommended that I go and pick up a template off of the internet for the kind of app I wanted. And so I went and picked that up, and I just kind of wound up with whatever they had. And so, it's not necessarily a well-documented toolkit, but it is kind of a way to get started as well, where you essentially, you pick up, you pick up something and then you just kind of go with what you wind up with. So.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear how how your experience was on that, Chuck. Did it end up being like you were able to get done when you needed to get done with it?
So I'm still working on it, but still working on it is essentially, I haven't even gotten the app to run yet. So
yeah,
I tried to run it using the instructions that they sent me, and it keeps failing. I think it's on the React Native video library. It's not linking it properly.
Yeah. Native integrations can be a real bear, and that's something that like all third-party packages seem to kind of struggle with, or at least the ones with native dependencies. And I know that we do too. Like there are some situations where people are filing issues and saying, "Hey, your just default like Ignite New is not working." We look into it and try to fix it, but React Native's upgrade process will sometimes break things. They just change linking. Which I think Christopher talked about. So these are things that definitely have to stay on top of.
Yeah. And I think what happened was I had like a deprecated NPM package. And so I ran NPM audit fix, and I think it pushed one of the versions up, and then it's not playing nicely. So, but yeah, I've only been playing with it off and on for a little while. And I don't know exactly what the story is there, but it definitely doesn't like me. So
I think there's one other point on this. There's sort of a trade-off you have to make between, are you going to try to make it a boilerplate, like super easy to build hobby projects in, or like side projects or one-person projects, or are you going to make it more like this is a really good base for an agency to build an app over the course of 6 months, right? And that's a very different use case. Mm-hmm. We're trying to hit kind of in between there, where like it's easy enough to get started, but you can like our development team would still want to use it. But that's a really tough thing to try to hit both of those things. And I'm a big fan of native base. I'm a big fan of of course, Expo. Expo is awesome. It's super cool. In fact, we're currently working on supporting Expo with Ignite because we feel like that's a big missing piece. And that would make it a lot more accessible to newbies, because Expo, you don't have to like set up Android Studio and Xcode and all your paths and everything don't have to be all set up. You can just run it and it works. So hoping to support that at some point here, maybe even this week.
I can definitely identify with the tension of not knowing how many opinions to put into it or not. I have just a little command line program to bootstrap my own React Native apps using my preferences. And I was like, oh, I'm going to put these libraries in. Every React Native app I create is going to have these libraries. And then the next one that I create is like, oh, I two of them I don't actually need after all. So it's hard to find that sweet spot.
Yep.
So what would you use, Josh? I'm really interested to hear your stack.
Yeah, especially with that app. I'm really, I know we had the idea of these 3 libraries, but now I'm curious to see what your whole stack is.
Yeah. So it like I said, it differs from project to project. This latest one, it's so funny. I've bandied around this for years, but I'm finally creating my own to-do list app. The stereotypical, like out of the box. But some people are really opinionated about their mail reader, others people about their calendar. But for me, it's to-do apps. It's like, I need my to-do app to be like just perfect. And so now I'm creating it. It's funny because, having to build all the features yourself, you end up with a much simpler approach to to-dos because I don't want to have to build the new features yet. Maybe I'll defer it. So maybe I'm managing my to-dos in a better way as a result. But yeah, it's just very simple to-dos so far. I'll say first, one of the unique things about it, sometimes I look for opportunities to use different libraries I want to try out that I haven't done before. And I try to select a hobby app project based on that. And other times I just wait to see an app that I feel like I need. And this time it's kind of overlapped. With to-dos in particular, I would really love good offline support and syncing support. Like I would love to be able to pull it up and have my to-dos already in from the last time I loaded it. On my computer, I'll have the app up on the web. And so I'm creating a React Web app as well as a React Native app. I'm not using any of Expo's React Native web functionality or anything. I wanted to build React for the web in the normal way. So it's 2 separate apps in that way. But if I make a change on one platform, I want it to get synchronized down and pulled in on the other platform. And so to get this functionality, I'm going with a not very well known data layer. It's Orbit.js. So this is works with the JSON API data spec. So it's not in the GraphQL world that a lot of us play in a lot of the time. But I've really loved working with JSON API for kind of CRUD-like operations where you're creating and reading and updating and deleting. It works really well. And Orbit in particular is really well set up to have. It's based around the idea of separate data stores. And so you say, okay, I have my in-memory data store, and I have my backup data store. You call it whatever you like, but I have my backup data store that's storing in local storage in the browser. And then I have a remote data store that's a JSON API web service that I'm pulling data from and writing data to. And you kind of, it's this declarative concept that React developers will love. You declare the relationships and the data flows between these sources, and then you just create or update a record. And those transformations flow around automatically between these different pieces. So I haven't gotten a chance to play with Orbit before, so I'm really excited to try it out. One of the things that I've run into actually is that the offline storage APIs like local storage and IndexedDB that exist on the web, those are different in React Native. And so Async Storage by React Native community that Chris mentioned is the typical resource for offline storage on React Native. And there's not an Orbit Async Storage integration written yet. And so I'm looking forward to trying this some more. Basically on the web, I'm going to try out the offline storage and see if it works well for my application's use case. And if it works well, and I'm like, oh, I really wish I had this on native, I might try to implement an adapter for React Native for async storage because that would really allow me to explore it some more. But again, because it is a side project, I'm not quite ready to shave that yak just yet. But so Orbit.js is what I'm using for the data layer, and yeah, that idea of the offline aspects of it is something that I'm really hoping to explore that I haven't gotten to do before.
Hey folks, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just launched my book, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. It's up on Amazon. We self-published it. I would love your support. If you want to go check it out, you can find it there, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. Have a good one. Max out.
Some of the other packages that I use, incidentally, I really love that the React Native community has a default ESLint config. I think when Lorenzo was a guest, I mentioned that as well. But all my projects on any JavaScript platform have ESLint and prettier for formatting. And so the fact that React Native with React Native CLI has that out of the box and a default configuration, I just really love that. Sticking with that by default. I got to throw in testing as well. It's kind of funny. Some folks would ask, hey, just for a little silly side project, would you really need testing? I'm doing test-driven development, actually. Is that really necessary? And the interesting thing that I found is even for little hobby side projects, I want to be able to keep my dependencies up to date. Like I want to pull down the new versions when there's security fixes and new features. And, I like to not have to click all the way through my app to make sure that everything's still working. Like I use a service called Dependabot that will automatically notify me when there's new versions of the packages come out. There's a few different services like that, but Dependabot was actually required by GitHub. So that service will put up a PR whenever a dependency is updated. And when I've got automated tests running, CI will tell me if it's good to merge that down to that dependency or not. And so, it is a little bit of a kind of, you don't have to keep all your hobby projects updated with the very latest versions, but it's kind of fun for me to see that run. It's kind of like gamified, like software updates. It's like, ooh, cool, it's green. Like I've got a new version of something. So that's one motivation that I put in testing in place, even on my side projects. And as I've plugged before, I use Detox for end-to-end testing by Wix. And I use React Native testing library by CallStack for my component testing.
No, I think it's really cool that you did that step in a hobby project, because if we're, talking to people, maybe junior levels or those who are just trying to get into React Native, if you build these kind of habits at home, they're just going to translate into the workplace, and they're good habits to have.
Yeah, and it was definitely useful to be able to come onto a client project and say, hey, you're using Enzyme? Like I use React Native testing library, but Enzyme is working well so far. And like, here's what I've learned about component testing. Here's when I would do it. Here's the trade-offs. And so for me, because it's something I get excited about, it was great to just kind of learn some on the side and have that ready to go as soon as I got on a client project. And yeah, I'd encourage that as well. Like, for hobby projects, sometimes, you can have all kinds of different motivations. You might want to launch the project and try to make money with it. That's awesome. You might want to scratch an itch and like build the to-do app or the note-taking app that you want to have that meets your needs. And so if that's the case, maybe you just focus on the functionality. But if you're wanting to kind of get, like I was saying, like try out libraries you haven't tried before, or kind of experiment with something or a certain approach, maybe you haven't used MobX State Tree before, and so you want to start an app from scratch and see how it benefits you. Because, switching an existing app over to a new data layer would be a lot of work and a lot of cost. But starting a new trivial side project app to try out a library and see the feel, you won't get the experience of what it's like at scale right away, but you'll get a taste for it. And so you'll get to see, hey, for my hobby project, like, a couple weeks working on this, so far signs are looking good for this library, or so far I'm already experiencing some pain points with this library. Maybe we wouldn't want to go with it during my full-time job.
Yeah, I've checked out your native up CLI, and one thing that's super compelling, because I am a lot of times the person kind of supporting Ignite CLI. One of the things that's super compelling about your script is just its simplicity. Like you go into the binary and you can read through what it's doing, and it's really simple to follow the path. Where with Ignite, we have a lot more power under the hood, but it's sometimes a little bit difficult to follow, like where are things coming through from, where's code running. There's just a lot more to it, and so you've done a really great job of keeping it simple, and like here are the dependencies we're adding, here are the different pieces we need to update. And then your template is very simple and straightforward. I like how you have this set up for sure.
Yeah, I should mention it. I'm not specifically looking to plug it or anything like that. It's mostly just for my own purposes. But I do enough hobby apps and like teaching apps that having a script to bootstrap apps for me works well. I have one for my Rails APIs. I have one for my React web apps as well. And I just kind of tweak it. Something I learned from folks I've worked with is, sometimes like the fact that I have to comment stuff out of my script and that things aren't always quite the same is not necessarily a problem. Some folks over at Thoughtbot that talked about their setup script back in the day would say, hey, I personally don't even actually run the setup script. I look at it to see what approach we look, and I run the command line commands individually one at a time to tweak them. Not everybody needs to do that, certainly, but like just having the standard of like, hey, if I don't want to think about it, I'm kind of recording here for myself, or maybe for my team, maybe for my company. Like, here's a way to set up an app that worked at a point in time. And so, it's kind of like, rather than just kind of taking notes on like, oh, here's the libraries I've used. Like if you put it in a bash script, like it's runnable, it's executable. So it can kind of save you a little bit of effort. Even if you're going to need to update it every single time you run it, it can kind of be fun to automate in a very low level way. It's not trying to be a CLI that you continue to use during your development process the way Ignite is. And, for me, it was mainly just really coming from the standpoint I just said, where it's like, oh, I just want to save myself setup time. Like the simplest thing to do is to do a bash script because I already know bash a little bit. But yeah, it's there's these different levels of abstraction, just like we talked about in the last episode. And, having options like Ignite, options like Expo that works in sort of a different way, and hopefully they'll be able to work together, just gives you options for the kind of project that you want to run.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Chris, I was about to mention another library. So if you wanted to continue on that train of thought, go for it.
I was just going to say, for those who aren't, it's really cool because, like you said, it kind of taps into those options for those, obviously if you're listening, you're not seeing it, but when you're starting the app, it gives you, I think it looks like an option to select either React Native CLI or Expo, and kind of goes through a list of libraries like Formic, and then React Navigation. So I thought that was really cool because it is kind of like your yes and no, and it kind of gives you like, what you want based on your answers. So I don't know if you're going to expand on styling right now, but I'll let you go ahead now.
I am, yes, going to expand on styling. So I mentioned that I like to use off-the-shelf tools. I've used React Native Elements for React Native projects before, and I really like it. This time I reached for React Native Paper by CallStack, which implements Google's Material UI. And the reason why was because for my web app, there's Material UI libraries for the web as well. And so I wanted the web version and the native version to look similar and work similar. Because they're different projects, they have a different API. So it's not, certainly the code doesn't come over automatically. So I'm kind of learning two different sets of components, but that's okay. I'm doing this to learn. One of the interesting things about Material UI, and maybe if y'all have used it, you can fill me in. I have an iPhone, not an Android phone, so I'm not in materially designed apps all the time. And something I've been hesitant about is like, I don't know, I haven't been motivated yet because of how little design chops I have. I haven't been motivated yet to read Google's material design specs to hear like how they recommend for things to be used. I'm just like hacking and slashing, like just getting something on the screen and getting it working. And like one thing in particular for navigation, like I know React Navigation looks like on iOS, what I'm used to on iOS, like those stack I forget what they're called in the native code, but like stack navigators effectively. But I'm not even sure what navigation patterns are like in Material UI. So do y'all know, would y'all use React Navigation with React Native Paper, or do you handle navigation differently when you're using material design?
I'm not sure either. I thought Android always kind of leaned towards the drawer navigation. I'm not 100% sure. Like drawer or tab, it seems like. I'm not really sure though.
And drawer meaning it slides out from the side?
Yeah. Which I see a lot because, a lot of the Android phones have that back button, which like, when you're coming into React Native, you're like, oh, there's a back button, because I have an iPhone and I've never had an Android phone. So when I came across that, I was like, oh, what? Like, I was totally just thrown off by it.
I'm also an iPhone daily driver, but I did recently get a Pixel 2 and start using it around the house, just, on Wi-Fi. And it's been helpful. But one of the things I think that's changed in the last few years is that a lot of apps are custom designed and don't really follow material design at all. They don't follow iOS design patterns at all. They have their own feel. I think that in the early days, especially, the UI guidelines and sort of the look and feel of having a native iPhone app or a native Android app were super important, because people didn't, developers and designers didn't really understand how to use this new medium, this touch-oriented medium, where now that's a little more of a solved problem and people know how to design for that. So when our designers get a new project, they're not looking at material design. They're not looking at the iOS, human interface guidelines specifically for how to do this stuff. Although obviously the human interface guidelines are still important. But a lot of times it's a custom design thing, and it actually looks the same on both Android and iOS. Now you do have to deal with the back button, like Christopher said, but the overall look and feel is really going away from being so material oriented, in my opinion. Google obviously still uses it internally for all their apps, but when I'm using apps, like if I go on my Pixel and I open Reddit, for example, it's not really material design.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. Once these platforms they've been around for 10 years or more, and none of those conventions are established. People who are designers who, unlike me, know these things can choose what conventions to follow and what to go outside of, because there's a common starting point that they're intentionally diverging from. It's just like before. I can draw something, just art that looks crazy like Picasso, but like Picasso, unlike me, could actually do really, realistic looking art. And so for him, it was a choice. Whereas for me, it would be, I'm not a good artist, so I just draw boxes in crazy shapes. So in the same way, designers who are talented designers know what iOS apps look like and what Android apps look like. And they design a custom experience that fits or diverges from those conventions for a reason. So yeah, your reasoning makes sense to me, Jamin, that there's leeway now from the maturity of these platforms to diverge.
Yeah, so I guess I didn't realize I just didn't answer your question, but yeah, I would probably use React navigation with Material UI. I don't really see a big problem with it. I don't think there's anyone out there that's like Material UI, like righteous, like crazy about it. You know what I mean?
that does help my comfort level. Like I didn't know if all the experienced Material UI developers
you're gonna get shamed by the Material community.
Exactly, for my 1-star personal project. I will mention just another thing in passing. I did go with React Native CLI for this project. I don't need any of the native integrations at this point, so Expo would have run just fine. But because I'm using Detox for end-to-end testing automation, a React Native CLI app is what's natively officially supported by Detox. And there have been efforts to make Detox work with Expo in the past with various levels of success, but they're not first-party supported by Wix. And so just to make sure that was a really good experience for me is why I stuck with React Native CLI in my case.
Yeah, I wish that we had a few more options on just across the board on the testing side, but primarily with integration testing. Detox is great, and I really appreciate the work that the Wix team has put into it. But there are some limitations that Wix doesn't need. They don't need to support, and so from that standpoint, you're kind of left to either do it yourself or just kind of go without. And so yeah, I wish there was a little more. I know Appium is a very common alternative. One of the big things with Appium is that you can run it on device farms. You can do real like full integration testing where you're actually doing like visual regression testing and other cool stuff like that. But Appium is notoriously flaky, notoriously difficult to work with, and because of that, actually, I think that's why Detox even came to be, was because of how flaky Appium was. It's black box testing. It doesn't have any insight into the internals. It's just tapping things on the screen and seeing if they respond. So I would say that the integration testing story for React Native is probably a little incomplete at this point. I wish that it was a little better than it is.
I think this has been a good discussion. We've got a lot of breadth for the libraries we use and why, to give people ideas and ways they could think about. Do y'all have any final thoughts before we head to picks?
No, I don't. I think I'm good.
All right, let's go to picks. Chris, do you have any picks for us today?
Yeah. So I'll have to link it. Like I said, I got a MacBook Pro recently, and one of the things I got, I thought, I was like, oh man, like my last laptop I had for like 7 years. So there was just 7 years of just, setup and experimentation and stuff. So I was like, how am I going to translate this or, transport this environment, and what do I really want and what do I really need? So I found a real good article for setup and really help expedite the process. So I'll have to link it on Medium right now. And that's pretty much my pick for this week.
Jamin, do you have any picks?
Yeah, so mine is a little less fun. There's an article by Doug Rickert on Medium called "Software Libraries Are Terrifying," and it's probably an argument against the sort of dependent bot flow, which I also love, by the way, Josh. I do that with my libraries as well. But this article kind of shows the downside to this sort of widespread sharing of libraries and open source, where people can inject things and you just would never really know to look at the diffs even. So it's about a 3-minute read, totally well worth doing just so you're informed. I highly recommend people click through in the show notes, check out that article, read it, realize why software libraries are a little bit terrifying. But then there are also, at the very end, there are also some pretty practical tips for kind of protecting yourself against that.
That's awesome. In the NPM ecosystem in particular, there have been in the last few years some big vulnerabilities that came out. So I think all JavaScript developers, it's incumbent on us to learn about these things, and as a community to find better ways to be more secure. So thanks so much for that recommendation. Chuck, how about you?
Yeah, I've got a couple. So I did mention the Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. It's out in paperback now. I am currently working on the audiobook version that should come out the beginning of next year. So keep an eye out for that. And my other pick is also a little bit self-serving in the sense that we've had a little bit of slowdown with the sponsorships. I mean, I'm working hard. I'm talking to a bunch of people. I'm just, I expect some stuff to land here within the next couple of days. But if you want to help us kind of build up a little bit more of a buffer and be a little bit more resilient, you can. If you go to devchat.tv, you should get a pop-up that basically has a button for Buy Me a Coffee. And Buy Me a Coffee is sort of like Patreon. It's a lot simpler. I tend to like it a little bit better. And so if you want to just go in and just give us $5 a month, honestly, that would really help out. You can also go to buymeacoffee.com/ I think it's devchat.tv. Just a second, let me get the link. Yeah. Buymeacoffee.com / devchat.tv. And you can just go and donate that way as well. And it does accept monthly payments. So if you want to do that, like I said, that would really help out. Eventually, I'd like to get it set up for all the shows. And that way we can give some of that money back to our hosts. But for right now, yeah, we're just trying to get things stabilized there. So anyway, those are my picks.
I just have one pick for this week. It's editor snippets. In your code editor, whichever one you use, pretty much all of them these days have the functionality to set up snippets. So some code that you use a lot, you can set it up with a shortcut. So you can just type in the shortcut name and it'll fill in the snippet for you. A lot of them even support placeholders. So if there's a couple places in the snippet that you are often editing, it'll just let you tab through them quickly. So these have been around for a long time in editors. I didn't get into them until very recently. A past computer I had some kind of voodoo curse and was always breaking, and IT was always having to replace it. And so I did like almost no machine customization at that point. I wanted to stock everything. But now that my machine's running a bit better, I have a little more of a stable environment. I've really found the benefit there of those snippets when you're just repeating things over and over again. This kind of fits into the themes of the discussion today. Like if you're not using a tool like Ignite that has a generator to generate commonly used kind of types of components and types of files, or even if you are, but you find there's something smaller that you're repeating a lot of the time, just taking a little bit of time to set up a snippet. It's just so simple to do it in Atom, in Visual Studio Code, I'm sure in other editors as well. So I'd recommend for anyone to look into it. Even a curmudgeon like me has had a good experience with it. It was very simple. So I think that's it for this week. Jamin, thanks again for joining. Looking forward to having you in future weeks and talking together. And I think that was a really helpful discussion. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Thanks everybody.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.